and welcome to our podcast. Once again, thank you for joining the webinar. The topic of today's webinar is going to be about the possible method of simplifying the management of hyperconverged infrastructures. Now, let me start off with describing the problem that led to a solution in our case. Now, based on our experience with the implementation and the assistance of our clients with implementing HCI solutions, we've come to a point of view that pinpointed a demand for the simplification of deployment, monitoring, and configuration of Windows-based environments. Now, for that particular reason, we started development of a solution that would offer a single window pane of management with possibilities of monitoring and managing an infrastructure, be it a hyperconverged or a compute and storage separated environment. Now, the process of deploying our solution would be based on the deployment of a pre-configured VHDX disk within your pre-created failover cluster. And for the time being, it would be needed to have a failover cluster pre-configured. Now, that's also something that we'd plan to get rid of in the near future and to make sure to simplify that process even more. So in that case, let's go ahead and start off with the configuration. Now, upon accessing the IP address of the command center, we are prompted with a login screen. Now, the credentials which I am about to specify are completely customizable, and it would be possible for you to customize them to your liking. So please just give me a second here. I'm going to put that here. Let's try a refresh here. There we go. So once we specify our login credentials, we would be required to specify the details of the cluster that we have running production or are planning to configure. So the domain would also be something we need to specify, and our login details. And the login credentials would be required of the administrator or anybody with administration rights to the cluster, which has been pre-configured before. So just a couple words about the process of its deployment or configuration with the existing cluster. The first thing that we would need to do is assign or specify the IPs of the hosts which will be used for compute or storage. In our case, since this is a hyperconverged scenario, the IPs of the host will be the same. But additionally to that, we would need to specify the ports, the users to those hosts, the passwords, quite obviously, and the networks responsible for the synchronization of storage in between the hosts. So just so you know, our failover cluster is based on 2 instances of Windows Server 2019, and we've actually pre-installed the StarWind Star Stack on each of them. Now, as mentioned previously, in the current build, the main requirement would be having a previously installed and configured StarWind software along with the failover cluster on each of the hosts and a pre-configured failover cluster mandatory, which will change in the nearest time. But We're also looking forward to incorporating other software-defined storage solutions like S2D or Ceph in our command center. Now, since the task of combining the management and the monitoring features within a single window pane was quite difficult, we actually had a clear vision of how that would be possible. And the purpose of today's demonstration and webinar would be to actually demonstrate to you how that can be done within your existing infrastructure or any new infrastructure you're planning to deploy. So instead of juggling the multiple management methods of the Hyper-V manager, the failover cluster, and the Windows system and the Windows Admin Center, we made a decision to actually provide you with all the possibilities from a single window pane deployed within a single cluster. So please bear with me here while this cluster is registered for the first time. But just while that's taking place, wanted you to know that we do have a workload running within that failover cluster just to repopulate all the widgets as far as the resource utilization would go. So let me start off by configuring the StarWind Command Center. And on the left here, we have recent tasks, events, and we are actually going to access the settings. Now, these will be the IPs that we specified for the cluster. They can always be modified upon need. It would also be possible to enable SSH access to access an administrator account to access that cluster, and the possibility of modifying the theme which is applied. Now, from the cluster tab, we have once again all the details of the cluster with the username and password to the administrator account, and the nodes which are used for compute. And now, once again, since we have a hyperconverged scenario, there would be a need to specify identical nodes or the details of identical nodes in the compute and in the storage tab here, which is mainly developed for the configuration of a compute and storage separated scenario, for example. Now, since our solution incorporates the whoops, that was some issue with the microphone. Yeah, it incorporates the Redfish protocol. Here we would be required to specify the IPs and the passwords to our iDRAC. Now, the Redfish integration would provide us with functionalities and possibilities of managing the hardware layer of our solution. Okay, maybe there's a space there. So here we would specify the IP for iDRAC, the login, and the password. Now, this process should take a matter of seconds, and cal then would be the default password, as I'm quite sure everybody knows. Now, this process should take a matter of minutes, and once we specify all of the partners and the connectivity and the credentials to access all of the components, we would then start our further research by looking into the dashboard, which is the first viewport you'll be greeted with upon accessing the StarWind Command Center, and breaking it down into the possibilities of monitoring and managing, and what each one of those possibilities would include. So now, once again, storage nodes are going to be the same nodes as we specified for the cluster. on this page, we would actually need to specify the networks responsible for the synchronization of storage. Now, in the case of StarWind's software-defined storage solution, which is also incorporated within this configuration, we would be required to dedicate two separate network connections over different subnets for the replication process alone. Now, the main reason for that is the elimination of any possible split brain or data corruption in the process of synchronization. And while I select this, just wanted to mention that all of these interfaces are customizable, and the main reason why they are already pre-selected here is since they've been configured as such in the cluster. So let's click Save and add in the second host for storage, which is also the host for compute. So on the agenda for today would be to demonstrate the possibilities of the Command Center, its monitoring feature set, the possibilities of management, and in order to demonstrate that, we are actually going to go through a process of creating a VM, cloning a VM, accessing the console from this single window pane, as well as cloning any pre-created VM which we have running in the cluster for the time being. So this specification process is actually something that you'd need to do only once, and that's unfortunately the amount of time it would take. But once again, that would be dependent on the configuration of the hosts and the speed of the network which you're trying to access the host from. Now, upon clarifying that all of these credentials are correct, we are presented with the selection of networks responsible for, once again, the synchronization of storage in between, in our case, two physical hosts. And just as a recap, the main reason why they are already auto-filled is because these are actually their configurations which were done in the process of deploying the failover cluster. Now, after specifying the compute and storage nodes, we would then later be required to create a ISO library, which will be a highly available, fault-tolerant, redundant volume accessible from your cluster and can be used for the improvement and or the comfort or ease of use of the ISOs, which you will be using for the creation of VMs. In addition to that, we would also need to create a configuration disk, which will basically be a disk with the configuration to all of the VMs running within your failover cluster. Now, while that's taking place, just wanted to mention that the Command Center is actually capable of multitasking, and any task which is running in the background will be available to us from the recent tasks viewport here. And let's go ahead and start with creating the image library along with the VM configuration disk for the VMs. Now, as you can see, while that is running, we can start off with an introduction to the first viewport, which will be a viewport with a summary of all the resource utilization, the conditions, and cluster information, along with the workload info also. Now, let me just start off by mentioning about the cluster summary, which includes information about the cluster, the operating system, which the cluster consists of, the version of the build of the StarWind stack, or any other software-defined solution stack, which StarWind Command Center will be compatible with in the future. Now, the workload summary would include information about the average queue depth, read-write ratios, peak disk throughput, all the way down to average I/O latency. Now, just so you know, all of these widgets are customizable, and in the near future, it would also be possible for you to create your own custom widgets. And other widgets would include the state of the VMs, the state of the nodes, and the availability of virtual disks. Now, those widgets will be followed by the widgets indicating the utilization of the resources of the whole cluster, with some more granular information as to the utilization of resources in between the host or guest. Memory utilization, storage usage, and a widget which would indicate the availability of storage for a backup repository, which is currently in the works, and we are planning to integrate Veeam into the command center, which will be accessible from this single window pane and provide you with benefits of creating, managing, or modifying existing backup jobs or schedules. Now, the next widget would be the performance widget for the whole cluster. Now, as you can see, it has several different tabs. Now, the performance would include the IOPS of the cluster-wide controller latency, the disk throughput, and would also provide you with an opportunity to select a different granularity level for those metrics, ranging from looking into the live metrics or metrics collected throughout the year. Now, each viewport will be followed by a tasks and event widget, which will be applicable to the viewport in particular. And just so you know, we would also be able of monitoring other statistics as far as the virtual machines, storage, and network information along with the nodes, quite obviously. And we'll just look into them in quite a bit. So let's just review the process and its current state of completion, which we've ran before. And just to remind you that was the creation of a configuration disk and the image library. Now, just to make a transition to the virtual machines viewport, as you can see, there are two tabs. And this is actually the solution which we came up with as far as the segregation of the management and monitoring features of the command center. Now, the monitors would all be accessible from the View tab, and some additional management functionalities is available on the Manage tab. Now, once again, the granularity would depend on the viewport which you select, and before we start with running through the different viewports, let's start off with the virtual machines. Once again, the virtual machines viewport would include widgets about the VM summary, their current states, be they on, off, paused, or saved, their availability, be it limited or high, and their protection status, which is once again part of the upcoming backup integration. Now, the resource usage would include information as to the amount of utilized resources, provisioned resources, and available resources. So it will be possible for you to pinpoint the amount of resources which you may have over provisioned. So once again, those counters would include memory, storage usage, and followed by additional performance metrics with a breakdown between the roles, the VMs, which you're running in your failover cluster, and the performance criteria, spanning from CPU usage to I/O latency. Now, once again, every performance widget would provide you with selecting the detailing spanning from live to yearly. And as every viewport, it will be followed by a tasks and events associated with that component. So the storage viewport would include the virtual disks availability, be it high, limited, or simple, the summary of the storage as to the data, the amount of data and the resiliency of that data, and its availability. Now, that is actually something that I wanted to demonstrate. So the availability of our solution would be based on the synchronization of storage over the networks which we specified previously, and that is actually how it's done. Now, just so you know, StarWind does block level replication, and all rate requests would get acknowledged only once data would hit the storage or the cache layer on both the nodes. And that in return would provide us with a maximum performing, fault tolerant, high available, redundant cluster shared volume, which would be then passed up to the hypervisor. So hope that makes sense. In this case, the availability, which we are at the moment, is at 100%, which is quite great, meaning that all of the storage volumes have been replicated in between both of the hosts. Now, as for the performance of the storage, we have a more detailed breakdown here with an indication of the average queue depth, read-write ratio, amount of IOPS, disk throughput, IO size, and latency. Disk throughput also available here, and cluster-wide controller latency. And quite obviously, followed by a tasks and events for the storage in particular. Now, the network is something that would provide us with an informational database here as to the networks which are assigned to either the host, their current shared status, if any VLAN is also applicable to them, and their type. Now, the Networks tab would provide us with some information as to the networks responsible for the communication of the cluster, the type of communication of each network, and their IP addresses. And the Network Adapters tab would provide us with the current state of each NIC, its link speed, its MAC address, and the node which it's associated with. Now, the nodes viewport would provide us with some insight as to the current status or state of the node, its health state, the distribution of the workload in between the nodes, once again followed by a resource utilization with different detailization here, and performance widget, which would allow you to review the performance of separate hosts or compare the performance in between the two as far as CPU usage, memory usage, IOPS, or disk throughput, or IO latency would go with, once again, the previously applicable granularity to all the performance widgets. And as the past, followed by a tasks and events applicable to the nodes. And just to let you know, there's a summary of all the tasks and events associated with the cluster at the last viewport, and it will be possible for you to acknowledge or mark as resolve any event which has taken place at the moment of your absence. So that's that as far as the monitoring goes of our solution. And just double check if the process of creating a VM configuration disk and initialization of the image library is complete. As we can see by accessing the recent tasks, we can now make a transition and create a placeholder VM and just review the process of how that's done. Now, from the Manage tab, it would be possible for us to look into all the roles running within the cluster. And as you can see, we actually have 3 roles running here already, and a placeholder VM, which has been previously created. And I can actually demonstrate you the management, or one of the possible methods of managing roles from within our Command Center interface. Now, other than the state of the VMs, we can also migrate it from one host to the other. And my actually personal favorite would be accessing the console, which we'll just do in a bit. So the process of creating a virtual machine within the cluster would be based on, quite obviously, specifying its name. It would also be possible for us to look and specify the host which we'd like to create it on, the generation, if mandatory, the amount of cores per socket or the sockets, enabling additional features, specifying the amount of RAM we would like to allocate to that VM, or the activation of dynamic memory with a minimum and maximum. Disk size, let's create quite a small disk just for demonstration purposes. The name of that disk, the placement of that disk in between the nodes, the possibility to apply RAM caching to that replicated volume, and the possibility to specify the replication factor of that data. So as far as replication factor goes, it would be possible for you to specify either simple, quite obviously, two-way or three-way mirrors of that data replicated in between the hosts. Now, network assignment, specifying the virtual switch, the possibility to select the ISO from the ISO library, which we've pre-created, but unfortunately didn't populate beforehand to select a Windows operating system OS, for example, and the specification of the boot order, more convenient for you. So let's put a check mark next to the power on after creation and carry on with its creation. Now, as you can see, the multitasking functionality of the command center would allow us to get on with any other tasks which we may have. And for that particular reason, let's go ahead and look into the console accessibility from this command center here. Now, by selecting the VM which we'd like to access, it would be possible for us to access the console without even making a transition from the same tab. So let's just give it a couple of seconds. And there we have it. So it will be possible for us to access this VM from this same window pane here. Okay, so let me just close that off real quick and check up on the status of the VM we're currently creating. On another note, let's go ahead and clone the VM we've previously accessed just for demonstration purposes and how that's done. So essentially this feature would power down the VM which is being cloned and once again restore its state upon the completion of that process. So the progress, as you can see here, indicates that the virtual machine has almost been completely created. And while that's taking place, let's go ahead and demonstrate the migration of VMs in between the hosts. So here we would specify the host which we would like to migrate that VM to and click confirm. So additionally, the management provides granularity of managing virtual machines and the storage volumes separately, but just so you know, the process of creating a virtual machine would be something similar to vVols, where it would create a separate storage volume along with each virtual machine you create from our interface. So that should provide some additional convenience in the process. Now, the Storage Manage tab would provide us with some information as to the current amount of cluster shared volumes from within the cluster, the size, the amount of utilized storage, free space, used space, and the status of that volume. Now, from the same tab, it would also be possible for us to create an additional volume, specify its size, the replication factor of two-way or three-way mirror, activate any caching if needed, specify the type of cache it is, and simply create. Now, other than that, it would also be possible for us to increase the size of the previously created volume by simply allocating a certain amount of storage to that process. So that's quite an additional level of flexibility. And just to check up on the progress of our actions here, as you can see, the VM has nearly been created. Now, the nodes management functionality is based on remote accessing into the node or into the host in particular. And let's just demonstrate that real quick. Well, other than that, the Redfish integration would provide us with possibilities of pausing the node, stopping the cluster service, or even powering off, shutting it down, or resetting the host. Yeah, so as you can see, these processes are about to complete. And while that's taking place, I just wanted to share the roadmap with you for the further development of our command center. Now, let me just pull up that screen here. And as you can see, we have several stages of development specified here, which we currently have planned. And once again, feel free to ask any questions of or features about. So some of the features which we're planning to develop is the additional development and management functionality of the networks, advanced storage management, proactive support integration, one-click template deployments, backup management, and extended hypervisor support. And for the time being, some of those viewports, which are currently in development, you can see right here on the left, one of them would be a proactive support, which would provide us, or our support department in particular, with some insight as to the current state of your infrastructure and allowing us to resolve any possible issues in a timely manner, even before they take place. So a second viewport, which is currently in development, is the backup integration. And once again, just as any other viewports here or any monitoring widgets, there should be a backup information widget available, along with some management functionalities from this backup viewport. So as you can see, the migration, I believe, has now continued. And this host is off. Let's go ahead and try and turn it on just to demonstrate the management of our solution as far as it goes to hosts. Not quite sure if the test is ready to run right now. So the creation of the disk has been unsuccessful for a particular reason. But that's the cycle of development, I guess. And just so you know, this is a beta of our command center, and it will actually be integrated with all of the future deployments of our hyperconverged appliances, and will come pre-bundled along with our proactive support, integration, and migration of any existing environments which it is meant to replace. So other than that, I believe this would be one of the best times to actually have any of your questions answered. Okay, we've actually have quite a lot of people asking questions, and sorry since I didn't pay any attention to this window here at the start of the webinar, but there was one person asking for a dial-in number. Unfortunately, No, I don't have the dial number to join this session here. Thank you for mentioning that you can hear me loud and see my screen, Rosario. And a question from Chris, is the HCA available on Windows Server 2019? My understanding was that StarWind HCA couldn't play well with Server 2019 because of an issue with storage spaces. Well, yes, that's something worth looking forward to in the near future. And during or based on the current testing process, we can tell that the future should be bright, and there should be a possibility of deploying a StarWind HCA based on Windows Server 2019, which was limited previously due to the low performance. Next question is by Dav Warren. Hope I pronounced that right. So is it a paid version of StarWind Manager? Well, not really. This command center interface has nothing to do with the StarWind Manager or the former management interface, which I believe you've come to find about, and is a completely separate product. And currently, it's not a product that is for sale. It's something that we'll just integrate for our future clients of the hyperconverged infrastructures which we deploy. And based on the feedback we gather, we are then going to look into the possibility of finding a price for this product. Okay, another question would be from Chris Hughes. Planned, all of those dates are in the past. Well, maybe the dates are a bit off, but all of the planned features are actually the features we are planning to implement. So sorry for the misconception as far as the dates goes. Okay, another question would be from Rosario. When can we download a beta? Now, that's something that you can address to the pre-sales department, and we'll make sure to provide you with a possible ETA as to when that could be done. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to provide you with any timelines or for its release. Now, Rosario, the software is truly amazing and will be a breakthrough, the best management tool I have ever seen in a long time. Well done indeed. Well, thank you. Now, another question from Chris Hughes. Will there be an upgrade path for the current HCA customers? Absolutely, there will be, and that upgrade path will be based on, of course, a possibility of implementing this command center at its current state and provide us with any feedback as to its utilization or a release candidate of the command center in the near future. Another question from James Jordan. Will this HCA virtual appliance image be available in Asia? Looking to use this management console to manage physical hosts without having to deploy localized on-premise resources to support the HCA console. Well, yes, the management of cloud hosts or cloud VMs is something that we're looking forward to, not on the roadmap just yet. There are the features that we need to calibrate. But yes, in the farthest future, that's actually something that should be possible. Now, another question from Sergey. Would it be possible for me to add an additional cluster to the existing management interface? No, unfortunately, the StarWind Command Center is currently limited to the monitoring and management of a single cluster, but we're actually working on spanning its possibilities of cluster management in the nearest future. Well, unless there are any other questions, I believe we can call it a wrap. Hope you enjoyed our webinar, and once again, feel free to send any additional questions which you may come up in the future to our sales representatives, and they will be more than happy to assist you with an answer in the soonest time possible. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye. Just received another question before exiting this webinar. Now, Rosario is asking about having a 12 StarWind cluster running already. Would it be eligible to get this software to test out? I can ask Praskovia, but just wondering. Yes, that should be possible, and go ahead and ask Praskovia about that, and she'll be more than happy to help. And thank you for attending the webinar, and have a great day.